The day Margaret Chen forgot her own name, she remembered everyone else's. At 73, standing in the fluorescent wasteland of a Walmart checkout line, her credit card declined for the third time. She couldn't recall if she was Margaret or Martha, if Chen was spelled with a C or an S. But she knew the cashier's name was Tommy because his tag said so, and she knew he had a daughter in college because she'd heard him mention it to another customer, and she knew, with the kind of certainty that transcends memory, that the young woman behind her, the one shifting impatiently from foot to foot, was someone's whole world. "I'm so sorry," Margaret whispered, her hands trembling as she fumbled through her purse. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. Behind her, she could feel the line growing, could sense the collective frustration building like storm clouds. Tommy's smile never wavered, but she could see the training in it, the practiced patience that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's when the young woman behind her stepped forward. "I've got it," she said simply, sliding her card across the counter before Margaret could protest. Margaret turned, her eyes swimming with tears that had nothing to do with the $23.16 worth of cat food, bread, and discount coffee. The young woman couldn't have been more than 25, wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon dogs and cats, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. "I can't let you," Margaret began. "It's done," the woman said, and something in her voice suggested this wasn't up for debate. "We've all been there." But they hadn't, not really. Margaret knew this in the way you know certain truths about your own life, even when the details go fuzzy around the edges. She'd been a professor on physics, she thought, or was it chemistry? And she'd never stood in a checkout line unable to pay for groceries. This was new. This was terrifying. This was the beginning of something she didn't want to name. "Thank you," Margaret managed, gathering her bags with shaking hands. "Thank you so much. Can I have your address? I'll pay you back." The young woman in scrubs smiled, and it transformed her tired face into something luminous. "Pay it forward instead," she said. "That's all the payment I need." Margaret nodded, not trusting herself to speak again, and made her way out into the harsh November afternoon. The parking lot stretched before her like an ocean, and she couldn't remember where she'd parked her car, or if she'd driven. Had she driven? She must have driven, but the keys in her purse felt foreign, like artifacts from someone else's life. She was still standing there, paralyzed by uncertainty, when the young woman in scrubs emerged from the store. "Hey," she called out, her own bags dangling from her arms. "You okay?" The lie formed automatically on Margaret's lips. "Oh, I'm fine. Just thinking, just enjoying the fresh air." But what came out instead was the truth. "I can't remember where I parked." The woman's expression shifted, and Margaret braced herself for pity. But what she saw instead was understanding, the kind that comes from intimate knowledge of confusion and fear. "Okay," the woman said, setting down her bags. "Let's find it together." "What kind of car?" "Blue," Margaret said, then immediately doubted herself. Was it blue, or maybe silver? "A Honda, I think." They walked the parking lot together, the young woman chattering easily about her shift at the veterinary clinic, about the Labrador puppy someone had abandoned in a cardboard box, about her student loans and her tiny apartment and her dream of opening her own practice someday. Her name was Sophia, she said, and she'd immigrated from Colombia with her parents when she was 7, and sometimes she still dreamed in Spanish. Margaret listened, grateful not to have to talk, grateful for Sophia's presence beside her like a warm light in a darkening room. They found the car. It was blue, a Honda Civica in the far corner of the lot, and Sophia waited until Margaret was safely inside before heading to her own vehicle. "Thank you," Margaret called through the window. Sophia waved, smiling that transformative smile again. "Pay it forward, remember?" Driving home, Margaret repeated Sophia's name like a prayer. "Sophia, Sophia. Sophia. She couldn't afford to forget. Not this kindness that had appeared exactly when the world felt like it was crumbling beneath her feet. But by the time she pulled into her driveway and it took her 3 tries to remember which house was hers on a street where she'd lived for 37 years, so the name had already started to slip away. Not Sophia. Or was it Sophia with a PH? No. Definitely Sophia. Sophia who worked at a vet clinic. Sophia who had paid for her groceries. Sophia who had helped her find her car. Sophia who had made her feel, for just a moment, less alone in her confusion. The next morning, Margaret woke to find 3 notes scattered around her kitchen, all in her own handwriting. Doctor appointment Tuesday 2 p.m. Take pills with breakfast. And mysteriously, here a pay it forward. She stared at the last note for a long time, trying to decode it. Her who? Forward where? It came back to her in pieces throughout the day. The grocery store. The declined card. The young woman as Sarah? Susan? And no, Sophia. The name rushed back with such force that Margaret actually said it aloud. Sophia. Her cat, Chairman Meow, looked up from his breakfast with vague disapproval. I have to pay it forward, Margaret told the cat, who had heard stranger things from her lately and had learned not to comment. But how? Margaret spent the afternoon trying to formulate a plan, writing ideas on sticky notes that she plastered around the house like a paper trail through her own fragmenting mind. Pay it forward, help someone, be kind like her. But kindness, she was discovering, required opportunity, and opportunities required leaving the house, and leaving the house meant risking the kind of confusion that made grocery store parking lots feel like labyrinths. 3 days later, opportunity found her instead. Margaret was in her front yard, ostensibly weeding the garden but mostly just sitting on the grass, trying to remember if she'd taken her morning pills or if that was yesterday's memory masquerading as today's, when she heard crying. The sound came from the sidewalk, where a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, sat on the curb with his bicycle lying beside him, one knee bleeding, tears streaming down his face. Margaret was on her feet before she remembered to be afraid of forgetting. Are you hurt, sweetheart? The boy looked up at her with eyes huge with terror and pain. I crashed, he sobbed. And I don't know where my mom is. She was right behind me and then she wasn't, and I don't know where I am. Something clicked in Margaret's chest. A recognition so profound it bypassed the faulty circuits of her failing memory and went straight to her heart. She knew this fear. She lived this fear. She was this lost child, and this lost child was her. It's okay, she said, sitting down beside him on the curb, ignoring the protest of her old knees. It's okay to be lost. It happens to the best of us. What's your name? Ethan, he hiccuped. I'm Margaret. At least, I'm pretty sure I am. Now, Ethan, let's think about this. Where were you going before you crashed? The park. The one with the purple slide. Adams Park, Margaret said, surprising herself with the certainty. That's 4 blocks that way. And where were you coming from? Home. The yellow house with the big tree. So your mom is probably somewhere between here and there, looking for you. And you know what? I bet she's just as scared as you are right now. Ethan considered this, his tears slowing. Really? Really? Being lost is scary for everyone, not just kids. Now, let's get you cleaned up, and then we're going to call the police, and not because you're in trouble, but because they're very good at reuniting lost people with the people who love them. She led him inside, her hands steady for the first time in days, her mind clear with purpose. She washed his knee, applied a bandage, gave him a glass of milk and some cookies that were probably stale but which he devoured anyway. She called the non-emergency police number, and within 15 minutes, a squad car pulled up outside, followed immediately by a minivan from which a woman emerged at a run. Ethan? The mother sobbed, crushing the boy against her chest. Oh my God, Ethan, I turned around and you were gone. I've been driving around, I thought. The lady helped me, Ethan said, pointing at Margaret. She said being lost is scary for everyone. The mother looked at Margaret with eyes that mirrored exactly how Margaret had felt 3 days ago in that Walmart checkout line, grateful, overwhelmed, seen. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. How can I repay you?" And Margaret, remembering the words even though she couldn't quite remember the face of the young woman who had said them, smiled and said, "Pay it forward. That's all the payment I need." After they left, after the police officer had taken her statement and praised her kindness, after the house fell quiet again except for Chairman Meow's gentle snoring, Margaret sat at her kitchen table and wrote herself a note. Today I helped her. Today I was her. Today I remembered that we're all lost sometimes, and we all need someone to help us find our way home. She didn't know, couldn't have known, that Ethan's mother was a nurse who, 2 weeks later, would pause her lunch break to sit with an elderly man in the emergency room who had no family and was frightened by the tests they were running, or that the elderly man was a retired teacher who had once mentored a young veterinary student named Sophia through her undergraduate degree, encouraging her to pursue her dreams even when they seemed impossible. Or that Sophia, on a particularly difficult day when a beloved patient didn't make it and the weight of her student loans felt crushing, would remember the elderly woman in the Walmart parking lot, would remember how a small act of kindness had mattered, would decide to pay it forward by volunteering at the local animal shelter, where she would meet a lonely widower who reminded her so much of her late grandfather that she made sure to visit him every week. Or that the widower, inspired by Sophia's kindness, would begin volunteering at a memory care facility, where he would read to residents who struggled to remember their own stories, helping them feel seen and valued and less alone. Margaret didn't know any of this, couldn't trace the ripples of kindness that spread outward from that moment in the Walmart checkout line like circles on a pond. Some mornings, she forgot Sophia's name entirely. Some days, she couldn't remember helping Ethan, though the note about it stayed on her refrigerator, even after the memory of writing it faded. But she remembered the feeling. She remembered that on the worst day of her life, when her own name had slipped away and the world had felt hostile and confusing, someone had stepped forward. Someone had helped. Someone had seen her humanity when she was struggling to remember it herself. And on her good days, when the fog lifted and clarity returned like sunlight breaking through clouds, Margaret understood a profound truth, that we are all her. Every single one of us, at some point in our lives, is the person standing in the checkout line, unable to pay, unable to remember, unable to find our way home, and every single one of us has the power to be the person who steps forward, who pays it forward, who helps another human being find their way back to themselves. The woman in the scrubs, the professor in the parking lot, the little boy on the curb, the mother searching frantically, the nurse in the emergency room, the teacher, the volunteer, the shelter worker, the widower, all of them her, all of them offering kindness like a rope thrown to someone drowning, like a light in the darkness, like a hand reaching out across the vast distance that sometimes separates us from one another and saying, "I see you. You're not alone. We're all in this together." And in the end, that's what Margaret held on to when everything else slipped away, not names or faces or specific moments, but the feeling of being saved by another person's kindness, and the joy of the profound, transformative joy of passing that kindness forward, of being for someone else what someone else had been for her. All of us. Every single day, until the end,